I will hand it over to Mike.
All right, thanks, Kaylin. I just want to confirm you can see my screen and I'm coming through okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks, Kaylin, and thanks everybody for joining. I know we've gone through lots of talks over the last 24 hours or so. So I hope you're still as excited as you were, a day ago. We've covered lots of information, and for me, anyways, it's just leading into building the excitement for the Atlas even more. So the session that I'm giving right now is on significant species. So hopefully that's what you were expecting. Just to give you a little bit of background, so there's all these different committees and working groups as part of the Atlas, and one of them is this working group that's dealing with significant species. The significant committee, we've got a group of folks from within the various Atlas partners, and as well as other experts across the province on rare and colonial species. So the presentation this afternoon is going to be about 15 minutes. We're going to cover what is exactly a significant species, why are they so important, why do we want you to document them, and how should you go about documenting them. So lots to cover, so I'm just going to get going here. So a significant species, it's something that's identified by the Atlas, by the Significant Species Committee. So there's three different types of significant species. There's provincially rare species, and they're identified on any Atlas checklist you see, whether it's in hard copy or on your phone through the app, or through the data entry Nature Counts website. They're identified with that dagger icon. Then there's the regionally rare species. Those are identified with that double dagger. And then there's the species of interest, which have that funny double S, symbol. So the provincially rare stuff, these are the super rare things, or things like endangered species, like this Henslow sparrow. And so for these records, you're going to get asked to provide details for any record breeding evidence attached to it, any level of breeding evidence. For regionally rare things, these are different depending on what region you're reporting your data in. So it could be something like a Swainson's thrush pictured here. In certain parts of the province, obviously, this would not be flagged as regionally rare. In large parts of the province, this is one of the most common birds you're going to find in the boreal forest, for instance. But if you recorded a breeding Swainson's thrush in, say, southwestern Ontario, one of those regions, then it would be flagged as regionally rare, in which case you ask for any record with any breeding evidence. The third type of significant species are the species of interest. And so these are species that could be something like a colonial species, like the great blue heron shown here. It could be more widespread species at risk, something like eastern meadowlark, or it could be just other species that we're particularly interested in. Maybe we think we know there's long-term declines or short-term declines, and we want to just get information. So for these species, you're only going to get adding some details if you enter confirmed level breeding evidence. Now, there are some other reasons that records that you enter into the Atlas could get flagged, or you could be asked for more information. The first reason is it could trigger an EBird flag. So all of the data that comes into the Atlas goes through what we call EBird filters. So these are filters that are brought in from EBird, and they basically set a daily limit based on the location for every species. So if you enter a high count at a time of the year where the species is common, it could get flagged. If it's a true rarity for the area, it would get flagged. And also if it's out of season, it could get flagged for that reason. The final reason that a record could be flagged upon data entry uses an unusual breeding code. So you'll start to see these yellow and green exclamation points popping up when you start entering different breeding evidence codes for different species. These are species-specific flags that relate to that species biology that we give you some sorts of warning about using certain codes for certain species. So why are we even asking you to document significant species? So there's two main reasons for this. The first reason is to verify the record. So, make sure that you identified it correctly. The second reason that we're asking you to document significant species is to get extra information about that record. So generally these species that are significant species, higher priority for conservation action. So they could be rare species, they could be colonial species. A lot of them are listed species at risk under either or both the federal or provincial Species at Risk Act or Endangered Species Act. So these species, we have sort of a higher standard or quality of data that we want to ensure we're collecting. And that extra detail can really go a long way for helping us enact conservation action by making sure we know as much as possible about the distribution status of the species and sort of the quality of their breeding sites. And I can't overstate the importance of this information for rare species in particular when it comes to properly conserving these species, their habitats, and their populations.
Sorry to interrupt you here, Mike. So sorry, just one moment. You're just breaking up occasionally. Of course, now that I've come on to let you know, it hasn't happened in a few moments, but I just wanted to let you know in case you wanted to maybe try turning your video off or something.
Sure, I'll try that. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna keep going, but please interrupt me if that happens again, Caitlin. The joys of rural living. So how are you going to document these significant species? So there's a lot of different elements that can go into a description or the documentation. So the good news for all of us is a lot of this information is automatically collected when you're entering the data. So things like the number of individuals, the date of the observation, all of that information, the breeding evidence code that you've used, all of that information you should be entering anyways for all records. So you're sort of several steps ahead already. So the stuff you want to focus on when you're adding details for these flagged records is things like description of the bird. So what you actually saw, how you identified it, what are some of the similar species that you're trying to eliminate, and how familiar you are with that species. It's also can be very helpful if you provide a description of the habitat or even take a picture of the habitat. That can really help out as well. There's lots of other things you can include, and I'm gonna get into a little more detail shortly. So there is a significant species form. There's a blank one and then a sample one filled out in the Appendix K of the instruction manuals. That this is the appendix that deals with significant species. So in this is just a sample. You do not have to do it exactly this way. You can just scribble it in your notebook, or if you're using the app, you can enter it, type in the information right on your phone. And a lot of phones will even let you use voice to text to fill in the information. But in this example, we've got Johnny Cash, who's observed tufted titmouse, which would have been a regionally rare species in this case. So it's been flagged for details in that area. And he's provided some good background information about sort of the circumstances of the observation, as well as some field marks in terms of what he actually observed. And he made note that he's very familiar with the species from all of his time in Tennessee. So just there are some samples that you can check out in Appendix K. There's a couple more from Johnny Cash, I believe. Now, if you're entering data on the website or through the app, the process kind of leads you along, so you don't need to remember everything you need to do. In this example, I've entered a breeding for a regionally rare species in the area. So because I entered a breeding evidence code, it's popped up that red text up at the top telling me that I need to document the species. So there's a little tick box that you've got to check to sort of confirm that you weren't just making a mistake with the data entry. And then you're encouraged to click on the add details box right here. So if you click on the add details box, that will pop up this little window here. And the first thing that you can add is the description. And so this is where you want to put information about how you identified the species, some of those things like similar species you considered, things like that. So remember, there's two aspects to what we're asking you to document. The first one is the identification, and so that we can verify the record. But we also are hoping to get as much extra detail, especially for the rarest things, that you can put in here. So there is a spot, the keen-eyed people will have noticed this little spot for media files. This box is not active yet. We're hoping this becomes live sometime soon. So at some point, you'll be able to click on this to upload your media files. So whether it's an audio recording or something like that. In the meantime, if you do, and we encourage you to collect that information, if you do capture some video or photos or audio, you can just add a note in the description for now to let the person who is going to review your record know that you do have these extra media files to support the observation. Now, sorry, I clicked ahead too fast there. Now, the last thing to point out on this screen is that middle option, the coordinates. If you click on that, it will take you to a map of the square, and you'll be able to see where you've been if you have your track log on. And you can toggle back and forth from the top view to the satellite view. So if you've clicked on this, then this is where you can add the exact location of where that particular bird was. So if you just zoom in on the location and you can click on the map, it will fill in the latitude and longitude for that record. You can adjust the number of individuals at that point, and then you can add as many points as you want for that checklist for that species. So this is really important for all species. We really want to get exact information for these significant species. For something like the species of interest, you should focus your attention on this. You can probably put a little less detail in the description. So just to kind of wrap things up, in terms of the significant species, we really want you to pay special attention to them. We want you to focus on and try to find as many as you can and document them as best as possible. It's really fun. I think it's one of my favorite parts of atlasing is trying to find these significant species and document them. The data is extra helpful. It really goes a long way in terms of helping us conserve these rare or otherwise important species. If you want to practice, you can practice taking good notes for common species in your area. And please try to document your finds with photos, video, and audio, and share some of those with us. If you're looking for more information, check out Appendix K. That's the one that deals with how to document this, these significant species. And finally, please talk to your regional coordinator if you do have questions about how to document a particular record. So with that, I think we've got our time for questions. I'm going to end my show here.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mike. We do have a few questions. Catherine asks, what about species that are expanding their range northward in response to our changing climate? Are these regionally rare, or will these be regionally rare?
Okay, I'm sorry, Kaylin, can you repeat that? I was busy trying to readjust my screen. No,
absolutely, no worries at all. What about species that are expanding their range northward in response to our changing climate? Sorry, are these going to be regionally rare?
Well, it depends on the species. So the way those regionally rare species lists were developed, we rely heavily on the Atlas II data, but we did also have to update that because in the past 20 years, there have been some pretty big changes something like red-bellied woodpecker, for example, here in region 16, where I am in Peterborough, I think we had 1 square, maybe 2 squares of the whole region with any breeding evidence. And now it's, in probably 3/4 of the squares. So, that's an example where we did definitely look at some things like eBird and other data sources to try to update those as best we could. So, it wouldn't be a regionally rare species here. There certainly will be options for us to adjust those lists throughout the 5 years. If we're finding that stuff aren't as rare as we thought they were, then we'll adjust accordingly.
Great, thank you. We have another question. I know that currently it's not possible to upload media files with the app, but do you know if that is planned for future iterations of it?
I think it's on the sort of longer term wish list. I think it won't be there this year. Maybe for next year. The goal is to get it up and running on the website first, kind of the way eBird works currently, where you can't upload stuff straight through the app. If you have photos or audio, you've got to then go to the website afterwards. So it's on that wish list, but we've got a lot on the wish list, as you know, Caitlin.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Angie's asking, there are cliff swallow nests on about 1/4 of the buildings in my town. Do I need to document all of them?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, you don't have to do anything. We would really like you to document all of your significant species finds. So if you can document all the cliff swallow colonies, that'd be awesome. But nobody's like gonna fire you from doing atlas data collection if you don't do everything to 100%.
Okay, and I think that kind of answers a little bit of Jean's question too. She said if we're atlasing in an area where a particular significant species is pretty common, can the documentation be a little briefer if they keep showing up on a lot of our daily checklists?
Yeah, and I didn't cover that very well. So there's a couple of things, sort of principles of documenting these species. So one of the principles to keep in mind is the amount of documentation you put in should sort of be relative to the significance of the record. So if it's the first breeding record of black-bellied whistling duck for the province, you should probably put a pretty good amount of effort into the documentation you provide. Versus if it's a meadowlark, eastern meadowlark, we really, for a species like that, if it's a fairly regular occurrence in your area, we're just looking for locations pretty much. And if it's a species you've already documented at a particular site, you can, refer back to the first time you documented it, things like that.
Yeah, and additionally on the app, there is the option to add a specific location as well. I know you showed that in your Nature Counts portal version. I went over it briefly yesterday as well in my app demonstration for how to submit data. So I just did want to mention that as well. Okay, so someone is asking, if I upload to eBird, will it go into Nature Counts when I transfer the list from eBird? I know the answer to that is no. But could they potentially add the link to that eBird checklist in the comments so that people can go to the checklist and view the media?
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. If you're for media, if you've uploaded it already to eBird, that's even better. I said you could put in the notes that you have a photo, but if you have a link to where that photo or video or audio is already stored, then yeah, just put the link and it saves everybody a couple steps.
Perfect. Okay, we do have a few more questions and we have a bit more time. So someone is asking, what constitutes a colony? I feel like that's a little open-ended.
Constitutes a colony. I can't remember. Mike Cadman, you're on there, I think. Yeah, I don't remember the exact definition. For some species, we might have slightly different rules. If in doubt, document it.
Tyler is asking, what if private landowners do not want detailed locations of birds submitted for their properties beyond the 10 by 10 kilometer square?
Yeah, I mean, we hope we won't have to worry about that too many times, but you know, I would say in that example, I would talk to the regional coordinator and we'll figure out something in those sort of rare cases.
Perfect. I'm just looking through here a little bit more. Okie dokie. Oh, yeah, that's another one with the 10 by 10 kilometer square. So I'm just going to mark that as answered. How should we determine which significant species to target? I have a rather low activity square with few rarities in past atlases.
Yeah, well, there's a few things you can do. So the first thing is go to your square summary sheet. So if you're on the Atlas website under tools and resources, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. The square summary sheet. How do you get to it, Caitlin?
Yeah, if you go under tools and resources, there should just be a square resources option on there. And so if you click on square resources, yeah, it's the third one down, and that will take you to a page where you can find the square. I can potentially just share this, where you can find the square that you're looking for. So I'll just put in a random one. And then you can download the summary sheet from there.
Right. Awesome. Thanks. So yeah, on the square summary sheet, there is a column where it lists. I mean, it's where it lists the highest breeding evidence for last atlas for any species. So you can use that as a quick first step to figure out what unusual, what significant species were there last time. I'd highly recommend going and checking out eBird. So you'd need to narrow things down a bit in terms of which species. You can look at species maps and see which species are showing up on eBird from within the within your square. Those are two good ways. The other thing is I would chat with other atlasers in your area and find out what species they might be looking for. Maybe chat with your regional coordinator. And then if you have, once you have some species in mind, then you can sort of narrow things down, looking at other places where those species have been found and sort of figuring out what habitat to focus in on for different species.
Yeah, and we had a few questions about what appendices we're referring to or how to find them. And I just wanted to let you know that all of the manual and the appendices can both be found on the website under the instructions and forms option, which is in tools and resources. I'll just put that in the chat. Yeah, all panelists and attendees. So yeah, the instructions and the appendices are all there. Okay, who has access to the records of where species have been documented? And I think that'll differ between rare and significant species and kind of other species, I'll say.
Yeah, so one thing I didn't talk about here, it's I hope it would be a whole nother talk, but there is a subset of species and they're pretty much all significant species, but there is a subset of species that are listed in the atlas. Those species, you can still see the data, but it's only available at the 10K square level. For other species, you can see the location of the checklist on the species maps, so people can access that information at that level. But all the like exact details and things like that would be available for the regional coordinators in terms of they're the ones that are going to do the first verification of the data, and then that information would also be available to the significant species committee, who does sort of a secondary review. And then at some point, you know, there is the option for people to request data through the nature count system, and there would be sort of like a data application process for accessing that information.
And so is there a list of significant and colonial birds available in the significant species appendix?
No, it would be too big, and it varies based on region. So you know, a regionally rare species is only regionally rare one region, not necessarily the other. So anytime you start a checklist, either in the Nature Counts app or on the Atlas website, you're able to see the checklist based on your area has those flags. There is also under the instructions and forms page, under tools and resources, there are printable Atlas data forms, and that includes Atlas checklists for each region. And that has, again, basically all the species. I think we didn't include some of the super rare stuff in each region, but there is a printable checklist, and it's got the proper flags for each species based on the region. So you can access it that way.
Yeah, plus you mentioned the square summary sheet as well. We'll have the flagging, and at the very bottom of the square summary sheet, it says what each one means if you do forget. So yeah, that is available there as well. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I guess we'll go with one more question. If you're importing data from eBird checklist to Nature Counts, it uploads only the species details from the eBird checklist in the details box. If you've included the coordinates in your details, do you need to manually transfer the coordinates to the coordinates box in Nature Counts?
Yeah. So you should, if you've put coordinates in the details in your eBird checklist. The problem with those is it's just stored as text that way, so it's not really, it's not easily gettable in terms of like a big database. So you can imagine if there's hundreds or thousands of records like that, it would take a person manually copying them, or else somebody would have to figure out a computer way to figure that out, and then you'd have to know that's what those particular things meant. So yes, please do use the coordinates tool within Nature Counts or the app to plot the precise location for all the significant species if you can.
Perfect, thanks so much. And if a bird is really rare, how would you like us to balance getting higher breeding evidence codes versus disturbing the bird?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the bird should always come first. So if you have any thoughts that you're going to be disturbing the species, and this really isn't just for rare species. This is for all species. You should leave the bird. I mean, if you've detected the bird already, that's good. We don't want you to be chasing a bird around through the bush trying to find a nest, and then you step on the nest or something like that. So always put the birds first, especially for rare stuff. And we do have a good section on sort of atlasing ethics and things like that in one of the appendices too.
Perfect, thanks so much. We're out of time. I see there is still a few more questions, but we do need to close this session down to open it back up again to start a meeting for the regional discussion. But thank you very much, Mike, and to everyone who has come to participate. That was super informative, and I think we all learn a lot more about proper documentation.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.